So this is the final appendix, and it's really literally that, an appendix, something added on. It's, in a sense, a continuation of what I talked about in the previous one, but it shows you that the same principles that were used to make letters can be extended as principles of space. So in the last one, I showed you that if we go to the Milky Way, that there is a particular configuration called Svati by the Russians, but which links obviously with a word in Sanskrit as well. And that if where we see four basic lines, that if we take that and impose a grid of squares on that, then the smallest square is called a Brahma Viti, then a Deva Viti, then a Manusha Viti, and a Pishaka Viti. I can take an 8x8 square, and then this becomes a grid for creating all kinds of names of gods. Or I can use this in an abstract way, as this one is called the Paramasaika Mandala, or I can use this to create a geometrical form of the galaxy. Now, then starting with simple dots, I can create a swastika, four squares this way, and build up and create the basic spaces for the world. In fact, Brahma as absolute space is 8x8. Brahma as the material world is 9x9. And the transitional forms of Brahma are an eightfold octagon or a circle. Now, remember that combination square, octagon, circle, because we'll come back to it. Now I can take this and start to create, this is the Manduka Vastu Mandala, and now I take my 3x3 is Brahma Viti, 4x4 is Deva Viti, Manusha Viti is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I get the Pishkasha Viti. I can link this with an X and create different kinds of padas. I can use this as a grid for understanding Shiva as the Nataraj, and I can do this for organizing, again, the gods. So I can do it this way, this way. Now I can have the Purusha from the back or the Purusha facing. I can link this with the four elements, and here I again show you the padas with 81. Now this whole thing becomes, on the one hand, a grid for drawing Purushas in different ways, but then as I add the number of squares from 9 to this, to this, to this, I also create an ever greater pantheon of Hindu gods. And I can do an even greater version, and an even greater version where now I get Brahma at the center, and in the Vastupurusha Mandala get all of it. I can translate that whole thing into letters, and then I get a Sarvatabhadra chakra, and again link it with gods. So I have 1x1, 2x2, 3x3, 4x4, 5x5, 6x6, 7x7, 8x8, and 9x9 squares. And this one is used for houses. This one is used for public buildings. Now, you will remember that when I took you to the Vatican in the early 1600s and showed you, remember the 3x3 square was for Saturn, the 4x4 square was for Jupiter, and so on, that the same alignment of these magic squares that creates a series of numbers in the Christian church and links up with a whole bunch of symbolism, here links up and becomes the basics of your whole Vastu system, not only for houses, but the way you build whole cities. And I am now abbreviating something about which we should really have at least 26 lectures in itself. But just for fun, I take you to an ideal plan of a Jain temple. I take you to the Adinath temple at Ranakpur. I take you to the ancient temple of Vishveshvur. And I take you to Bramante's plan of St. Peter's in Rome. Ladies and gentlemen, we always, in the Rome, we always talk, well, the Vatican, the most important big building. Well, of course, there are churches in the Arabic world that are 30 times the Vatican, which we Christians never hear about. There are churches in the Hindu religion that are at least 10 times the size of the Vatican, which we never hear of. Temples that we never, well, whether we call them temples or synagogues or mandirs or whatever, yes, but you're quite right to point that out to me. But still, here we see there is no doubt that there is a connection between these. And no Christian church Christian textbook will show you this connection. And I haven't seen any Hindu connections that show you that the Christians stole it. But now I take you to something even more dramatic. Because remember I told you about the circle, the square, the octagon, and the circle. Well, we all know about a subject called the linga, which we link with Shiva, and with this form that we link with Shakti. Well, this is a Hittite, this is not Shakti, this is a Hittite oil lamp. And so I will not dwell, of course, on all the Freudian dimensions of the linga. That is clear to anyone that has gone to school or even before. Here you see an extraordinary, we're now at Kontling Shavara, where we have an enormous linga, and then the whole floor linked with lingas. Freud would love it. But here, we see that the linga, of course, has, as always, a deeper connotation. The square bottom part is Brahma, the octagon part is Vishnu, and the round part is Shiva. So it is not just somebody's anatomy, it is also a linking with the three gods who are, of course, the creator, preserver, and destroyer. And we can create this version and this version. And now it becomes more interesting because if you think of Arabic architecture or Zoroastrian architecture, I start with a square building. I get an octagonal part as I'm going towards the roof, and then I put a cupola on it. So the whole of early Arabic architecture is actually a commentary on Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And to go close to home, I show you the Patan, it's the main square at Lalitpur, here in Patan. And what do I have? I have a square, I have an octagon, and a circle. Or I go into the temple compound itself, and I have a square, an octagon, and a circle. How many Nepalis that I would ask on the street would tell me the relationship between this column and Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva? Probably not everyone. But now I go further. Here is a detailed notion of a lingam. How many of the typical persons would be able to give me the 67 basic parts of a linga? And I'm not asking you to recite them and do them backwards and do a somersault at the same time. I am suggesting to you that what we need, we talk about augmented reality, but we see a linga and we say, oh yeah, well, I know what that is. I have one. But what we need is glasses that show me, on the one hand, that this is three gods, that this is three stages of creation, and that this is actually more than 60 stages. And now to take you for the surprise journey, I take you to the Arab world. I take you to one of the most famous mosques, the Al-Masjid Al-Nabawi minaret. And what do I have? A square, an octagon, and a circle. And I take you to Rome, ladies and gentlemen. And I take you to San Paolo fuori le mura. This is now the bell tower of the Church of St. Paul in the holy city of Rome of the Catholics. And what do I have? A square, an octagon, and a circle. I have, in no Catholic book, seen any connection between this and the linga. Now, there would be a way of presenting it to make all of this laughable, but there is clearly something that none of us, as normal Christians, Hindus, or Muslims, has been taught, that there is I'm talking again of this, what Jung would have called the collective unconscious. There is a collective consciousness of deep symbolism that connects the most sacred buildings of three of the greatest religions of the world. And we can go further, because we have those three gods, they become three temples. Well, here we are in Prambaram, and now Shiva is not just a name, but he's a major temple. And here we are now in Borobudur, and what do we have? We have the Brahma Viti, the Deva Viti, the Manusha Viti, and the Paishaka Viti. Here I have a pool, and I have the same thing. Here I am in Angkor Wat, and what do I have? This extraordinary compound links up with those four Vitis, which, as we remember, is a map of the cosmos. Or I go to the Annamalaya temple, or here to the, in two visions, and we see that the various compounds of this great temple is nothing more than an imposition of those Vitis, which is, of course, a linking of the different kinds of squares, but is also a mapping of the whole cosmos, which, from the lectures, we saw was also a way of organizing the letters of the alphabets. So we again need glasses. I need glasses to be able to see that this is a temple, that there are squares involved, but that those squares again link with the cosmos, on heaven as it is in earth, on earth as it is in heaven. And that this breath of God, which turns downwards and becomes the symbol of the male, is two yogis, or links up with these letters, or becomes a yogi of Shiva in 19 points, where those 19 points then end with number 19, which is the number of life, and which ends again where the linga is, without going into all the gory details. And then I can reduce a seated Shiva to this figure, a Dravidian Vinamam, and show how the seated Shita, I have to be very careful, links to this figure. So the letter becomes a person, becomes a symbol, becomes a building, becomes a symbol, becomes a person, a letter. I take somebody sleeping, I check his chakras, I make one chakra into a linga chakra, I make this one into this kind of chakra, and this one into a Gaupuram. And I have basic versions of making Hindu architecture. Here are two other versions. Here's a Hebrew version of doing the same, but now those chakras become linked with the planets. And of course, if I turn it around, I can have one version linked with the planets and another with the chakras. Or I can go back to the Christian one where I unfold the cube and I have the human being, and that human being then becomes the mystical Temple of Solomon and the Castillo of Camelot, with his Ha and his Tha and his sun and the moon. And then I can link all of that with the planets, make it this way, or I can, in a city, in Iran make a whole city of Hamadan with 6 divisions, which are still visible today. If you take the picture of the city by night, you can still see the imprint of this model that was made over 2,000 years ago. And of course, if I make a 3D version, I get this minaret. And of course, if I reduce that, I get back to my candelabrum, which then links up with all of the 7 sounds, the 7 chakras, the 7 metals, the 7 alchemical forms, and so on. Well, that little whirlwind tour across the letters and the forms could easily be a new course on architecture, but a course on architecture that would not be about Indian architecture or Islamic architecture or Christian architecture, but that it show that underlying that is this notion of squares, that those squares are linked with magical squares, that the magical squares themselves are a way of organizing the swastikas and their variants, and that if we change those geometries into numbers, we get a number symbolism. If we change them into letters, we get a letter symbolism. And so the process of imitating the cosmos becomes a way of creating an order that allows me to explain how the cosmos was created, how the cosmos is breathed, how the cosmos is lived. And so the alphabets of life are not just letters, they're everything.